50-50 by 2020 to get women to get the bigger budgets as well.
It's very important that we put the stories in the hands of the people who own those stories.
Greetings and welcome to day one of the TIFF Industry Conference. My name is Karina Rotenstein. I'm the conference producer and we're thrilled to welcome you this afternoon. To begin, we'd like to acknowledge that today's event is taking place on the treaty territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation and the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Huron-Wendat. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Just a reminder, no professional photography or video recording allowed inside the studio, but not to worry, we are live streaming these talks to our YouTube and TIFF Talks channel, and these sessions will also remain online as well, so no need to film yourself. We've got it covered. And if you are engaging with our social media channels, please tweet or use the hashtag TIFF19 to engage in the conversation and keep it going. Today's session, The Big Screen, Have Rumors of My Demise Been Greatly Exaggerated, is part of Telefilm Canada's RDV Canada panel series, and we'd really like to thank Telefilm Canada for their presentation of this session and their session on Sunday at 10 a.m. in Conference Room B, just around the corner. And also for being such wonderful partners of TIFF and TIFF industry programming. Now, without further ado, to introduce our guests, please join me in welcoming to the stage the Executive Director of Telefilm Canada, Krista Dickinson.
Thank you, Karina. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Welcome to today's Rendezvous Canada panel, The Big Screen, where Have Rumors of My Demise Been Greatly Exaggerated? Alors, comme elle a dit, mon nom c'est Krista Dickinson, je suis la directrice générale de Téléfilm Canada et je suis enchantée de voir tous vous autres réunis ici pour notre premier panel de cette année au Festival international de films de Toronto. Bien sûr, un grand merci au TIFF pour nous aider à organiser ces présentations qui sont tellement importantes pour notre industrie. Our Rendezvous Canada panels are an opportunity to share market insights and research along with personal stories, as well practical advice from those working in the creative sectors, all with the aim of helping participants in a robust screen-based industry make none other than better informed decisions. Alors, plongeons sans plus tarder dans le sujet pour aujourd'hui. Our industry is forever changing. We all know that. Different formats come and go. But through it all, the big screen experience has stuck through it. Over the years, audiences have flocked to cinemas to see the latest Hollywood blockbuster or patiently waited outside their local art house theater to get tickets to the critics' latest coup de cœur. Until recently, that is. So audiences are still certainly going to the movies, and we know the most recent Avengers film or Lion King remake, that's a sign of that. But overall, things have been slowing down. With the ever-increasing popularity of streaming services like Netflix, Crave, Apple, audiences obviously have more options for discovering the content without hassle of leaving their own homes. Now, with tentpoles and bigger studio films that have taken less of a hit, the theatrical model for the most independent, less commercial fares have certainly changed, however, in the last few years. So here are, and yet one of the largest film festivals here we are now today in the world with screenings that are actually sold out. There's as many as 2,000 seats that are being filled at TIFF. So is this all actually overblown? Question. Are we focusing on the wrong questions? Is it the format that audiences are growing tired of? Or is it the stories that we are telling? So for today's discussion, our panel of industry experts will debate the state of the cinematic experience, discuss industry and audience trends, a lot of numbers, I've been assured we're going to get some of that, as well as highlights the new opportunities that today's marketplace is actually offering. You're also going to find today's discussion to be insightful, so please be sure to join us for our second panel that Karina mentioned, Demystifying Platforms Getting Shelf Space, where there we'll be taking a more in-depth look at streaming and how to reach audiences and get their own platforms. That's on Sunday. So, moderating today's discussion will be Eli Glasner, national entertainment reporter and film critic with the CBC. His Friday film reviews are a familiar feature seen weekly on CBC News Network and heard on many of CBC's radio's top morning and afternoon program. Glasner's coverage of the changing worlds of film, music, gaming, and just about everything out there appears regularly on CB's The World at 6, and The World Report. You can see him everywhere, podcasts, etc. You know it. He's on many jury panels. So with no further ado, j'aimerais céder la parole à Eli pour qu'il vous présente nos panélistes. Over to you, Eli. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Krista. Thank you. And this is a remarkable festival, and so it's something to actually spend some time listening to us and talking about, I think, something that we all share, and it's that experience of being in the dark with a group of strangers and sharing that, and not knowing what you're going to see, and having those experiences and those emotions amplified by that setting and the very medium of the format. And I don't only want to have that with superheroes as much as I adore them. I want the whole variety of cinema, and so that is what this is about today. So let's begin by just meeting our panelists. We'll begin with Annick Poirier. She is the co-president of the newly created Wasabi Films. Annick, welcome. We'll have to hear about the new name of your company. It's a neat little trick. And then we have Matthew Ball. He is a managing partner of Matthew Ball Venture and Advisors, Matthew, and Alison Cosberg, the managing director of Art House Convergence. I'm going to start just briefly. If you can, each of you give us an overview of exactly what you do, just so we have a sense of where you're coming from. So, Annick, why don't you start with your new company?
So my new company. So Wasabi Films, first of all, is a newly created company. I come from 30 years of experience. I started the career at Disney Home and Entertainment, and then migrated to Seville International, the small one, which was very art house driven. And I started selling films, and I've always been as an agent, a sales agent, so selling films internationally, worldwide, to distributors all over the world.
And you've worked with Xavier Dolan, you've worked on other award-winning films like The Babadook.
Xavier Dolan, so we did Xavier's last 4 films. We also did The Babadook, we did Animal Kingdom, we've done Beast of the Southern Wild from Ben Zetlin. So we're basically very much aficionados of art house film. We believe in art house film, and we're there to make it stay. So we're basically very international focused, and Wasabi is the name of my cat, so I decided to name it the name of my company, because I think it lacks sometimes a little bit of humor in our world, because sometimes it's a bit depressing. So I decided to put a little bit of a smile on people's face.
And the cat is adorable. I've seen it on the brochure. It looks lovely.
I showed him my cat.
Matthew, you're a venture capitalist. Tell us a little more about your background.
Yeah, so prior to becoming a venture capitalist, I was the head of strategy at Amazon Studios as we went from 4 countries to 200 countries and territories globally. And that meant standing up not just greater demand or purchasing for films, but defining what your per market strategy would be for content. And of course, one of the interesting things we'll get into today is some of the things that are happening here are still opportunities abroad. And to that same token, the influx of international films and production and demand in those markets will also start to flood into not just Canada, but America as well. Mm-hmm. And then today I primarily spend my time focusing on what I think is around the corner in digital media: new experiences, new brands, new stories, new intellectual property and franchises. And then I work hand in hand with those entrepreneurs to try and build those businesses up.
And Allison, you're in the trenches with all those art house cinemas, fighting against the colossuses out there. Tell us a little more about what you do.
I rarely think of them as the trenches.
Okay, the glorious trenches.
I'm the managing director of Art House Convergence, which is a North American association dedicated to advancing excellence and sustainability in theatrical exhibition. We work with about 300 theaters and exhibitors in the United States and Canada each year to provide educational resources to increase the quantity and quality of cinemas.
All right, so you have a good sense of what is working and what's not.
Absolutely.
So, Matthew, I'm going to ask you to do a little bit of heavy lifting. I want a bit of a lay of the land here. I mean, you look at some of those numbers that Krista was talking about. Tickets sold per person, if we go from 2000 to, I think, last year, down about 33%, that frequent film-going audience that we've heard for so long is so critical. The people that don't go to maybe 1 or 2 movies a year, but multiples of that is also shrinking. And yet the number of movies is exploding. So can you give me kind of an overview of the industry as you see it right now?
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing when you take a look at the theatrical space is we all know it's in transformation or transition. That's nothing new. That's no surprising narrative. But if you take a look over time, it's not just the reduction that's happened since 2000. We are now at the lowest point of per capita admissions to the theatrical box office since the 1800s. In the 1800s, that was constrained by supply of theaters and supply of films. We have neither today. And so if you track that back, in the 30s, people were going to the films 40 to 50, 60 times per week. In the 60s and 70s, it was 40 or 30 or 20 times per week. And that's a reflection of just how the role of the theater has changed. In the 30s, it was one of few entertainment options for video. It peaked during the Second World War, where the function was not entertainment, but news and understanding what's happening abroad. Over time, it has continually shifted down because it became not the only source for entertainment. Those alternatives for entertainment became greater, easier to use, lower cost. The most devastating, in fact, to the theatrical industry has not just been the rise of streaming services, but the fact that a tablet allows you to get out of or escape shared devices in the home. You no longer have to just watch the movie your parents want to watch or your sibling wants to watch. You can all watch something together. And so the answer of whether there's a durable floor to the theatrical box office, of course there is. It's still a social experience. It is still the best spectacle. It is still something that is better to do with other people than to do alone. The challenge is, what's that future? If we used to go to the film 100 times a year, then 5 times a year in 2002, then 4 times a year 4 years ago, this year we're probably going to get down to 3.4. In 5 years, it's hard to argue you're not going to be down to 2.8 or 2.9. And the real question is, what does that provide the ecosystem? Right. What films can survive? And the fact that you have 1 or 2 films that aren't superheroes, aren't Luke Skywalker, what does that mean for the ecosystem?
Right.
And diverse stories in particular. So,
Allison, then, I mean, as Matthew was talking about, increasingly we're seeing the theater, when people do go those 1 to 3 times a year, it's the event films. And they're the brand name films. They're often the franchises, the sequels, the superheroes, and whatnot. In your experiences, how are the smaller theaters kind of finding a space for themselves, fighting that trend, or maybe co-opting it in their own way?
So there's about 10 to 12% of moviegoers that qualify as frequent moviegoers who are going once a month or more. And many of those patrons are art house and independent theater patrons. So our data shows that the average art house patron is going to the theater, to see a movie in a theatrical space over 20 times a year. So what we see is that the most passionate and committed advocates for the theatrical experience are willing to devote themselves to their independent or alternative cinema, a space they have a relationship to, a space they want to see in their community, and a space that makes going to the theater not a hassle of looking for parking, but an experience that they absolutely want to have. So I think that if we are to shift our way of thinking a little bit away from leaving the house is a hassle to our homes are actually filled with hassles. My home is where my laundry is. My home is where I can look at my phone and receive work
marketing
emails.
The theater as the oasis, right?
And it can be.
Yeah.
I think to run a great business and provide an exceptional, personalized theatrical experience, to show excellent films and understand how they intersect with the needs and imagination of your community specifically has proven to be very successful for art house cinemas over the course of the last decade.
In our previous conversation, you were talking about the documentary RBG and how that it became its own event, like maybe an event on a smaller scale, but the success of that, which did very well, was, I guess, connecting to audiences.
And interestingly, our national audience survey, one question we ask is, what experience were you most grateful to have in your art house cinema this year? And that year, the majority of respondents selected seeing RBG in their local art house.
So what do you think it was about that experience or that film that cut through the noise, that it was a success, that people actually got off the couch, made plans to drive to park, etc.?
I think that there was enthusiasm about the subject matter, but also enthusiasm about the opportunity to watch a piece of media together and have a substantive conversation about it, about civics, about judicial philosophy, about women in the workplace. Theaters around the United States partnered with local law firms, partnered with female judges, used the film as a gateway to having a more robust conversation about how the law and gender function in their community, and shared their spaces with other nonprofits in their community that were eager to lead those conversations.
Anik, how would you describe the state of health of the marketplace for the kind of independent titles that you're trying to share?
It's actually quite challenging, and it's interesting because in preparation to this, to this panel, I was asking, various clients or various distributors, whether it's from Asia, whether it's, from the Benelux or Holland and Belgium or Germany, and it's quite challenging in the sense that it is shrinking. Everyone's really coming to terms with the fact that the business is extremely challenged. There are a lot of films available. For instance, in Germany...
Are there too many films?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
In Germany, they launched 800 films last year. Something similar in France. I would, in Canada, it mustn't be too far from that. And how do you make a living when you have so many films that are really piling on top of each other, and you actually don't give them any breathing space for them to actually grow, because the art house films don't have the advertising campaigns that, let's say, the Marvel comics have and whatsoever.
Right.
And what's happening is you have these bastions of people that do believe in art house. They do believe in understanding and having an intellectual experience and a connection with what cinema is. And cinema is art. It's not only entertainment. And what is important is, I think, I come from Disney. I sold Lion King. I was part of the 3 million units of video cassettes in this country, so I'm guilty. And a lot of kids have grown up with those films, and cinema has become you put the kid in front of the home video at the time, and that was the nanny.
Yeah.
And when you speak to Europeans, there's much more of an attachment in having cinema as positioned as art. The question is which film will work? And if I knew today, I'd be on a beach, actually on vacation, because I would be very rich. Because it's a gamble every time you take a film. Why did RBG come out?
Right.
Why did Kedi, that documentary on cats in Istanbul, come out? Why did these... Yeah, she's applauding. I loved it too. Cat power. But, in essence, what's really interesting is to see that those films, they need to have something that will bring to people, like RBG. These people have connected to the film because they learned something. They grew from it. The experience was, man, I feel like my life changed a little bit because I've seen this documentary. I just came from Venice. I saw this film called Woman. It's amazing. If you guys, I don't know if I think it's playing here. You have to see it. I'm not even selling it. I'm really sad. But in essence, you see these films, and then you come out of them, and you feel that you've grown, you feel that you've learned, and you feel that your life has been changed, and I think that's what cinema is all about. And I'm a firm believer that art house is extremely necessary, because the example is if you feed candy to kids every day, how the hell are they going to grow? And that for me is entertainment. If you feed them things that are smart and nutritious for the mind, your population and your culture is going to grow from it, because we need to understand each other. We're in a time where people have been connected to everyone but have never been so alone. And I think cinema is important to get people connecting again.
It sounds as if the examples that you raise, that you need a film that is a succinct, marketable idea. It's a wordless documentary about cats. It's this amazing woman who continues to survive and on the bench with the RBG. But there also has to be the payoff, right? There has to be that positive word of mouth when they leave the theater to tell their friends, I just saw this thing, right?
Yeah, but the word of mouth is, how do you get that? How do you get a film to exist? Well, festivals such as TIFF or Venice or Berlin or Cannes have become a really major proponent of bringing these films to life, because it actually gives them the validation that you should see them if they've won a prize and whatsoever. And festivals are becoming curators of what people are watching. So for us, it's become a necessity.
But in this world where movies like Long Shot and Booksmart, and like movies that critics adored and that they didn't even find a spot, I mean, I'll ask you, Matthew, is it getting harder, given the theatrical challenges, to make those smaller films now? Because there may not be that payoff.
Yeah, I mean, the real challenge there is it is getting more challenging to do those, at least to generate a return. But part of the issue, as we've seen with the struggles of Annapurna or Broad Green before that, is there is still sufficient supply of capital and talent and stories that could be told, that could kind of meet that mold, that the supply of those films that are going to the box office, that, to your point, start to squeeze out the success and the marketing message and the opportunity for the rest, that's going to remain a challenge. You actually can continue to make those movies despite the fact that those opportunities for a return, let alone a sustainable business, aren't very many.
Like, is it worth at this point, given that shrinking spot, like what's left over for the independent titles, is it worth even bothering with theatrical? Just instead focusing on VOD, bypassing that entirely?
That will be, and it has been for a few individual titles today. I think one of the challenges is we still have a frame of reference which says the films that skip the theater are the ones that had no shot there. And that creates a vicious cycle, because you look at a title that you might think is substandard and it premieres on Netflix, and your answer is that's why it's not in the theater. Over the coming years, we will absolutely see titles, and we might see some of those soon this fall, that could have had a plausible shot at the theater, and they're going to start surviving purely on the smaller screen, or in some sort of hybridized day-and-date release or limited release. And once that happens, that will be healthy for the ecosystem for two reasons. One is it pulls films out of an unprofitable channel, but the second thing is it provides a stable, and that's the most important thing, a stable economic model for independent film creators. The idea that you might generate millions of dollars and get to your beach, that opportunity is going away. But for a lot of independent filmmakers, what they want is to be fairly and adequately compensated for the opportunity to make creative product. And if you can deliver that in a streaming platform, reliably, hit an audience, and have the money and the success that allows you to keep doing that, especially if you're telling a message that you think is important, and then have the odd opportunity, if you have an RBG, to bring it to the theater and it to work, that's terrific, and we'll get there. But in the interim, as we manage 800 films per year, plus many international imports, there's going to be a lot of trauma, and we're seeing that with the major independent financiers today.
But I have something to add, just 2 seconds. You know, look at Lady Bird. A few years ago, that was in TIFF. Why the hell did that film come out and not Booksmart? You know, there's a question of timing. There's a question of a lot of factors that make it, oh my God, like Beast of the Southern Wild, that's a film we distributed. You know, when we had the film initially, we looked at it and saying, oh, that's pretty funky. And then it goes, you know, to Sundance, and it goes to Cannes, and then it just explodes. And then you see this amazing aura, and, you know, you're saying it's amazing filmmaking. Our business, we can be at a casino every day and saying, we're going to bet on this, we're going to put a 5 on this, we're going to put another chip on this. This is what we do. We are trying to guess where people will be thinking in 2 years' time, because we buy films on script and whatsoever. We, sometimes, as much as we have experience, don't know. We don't know that people are going to get sick of zombies or not. We don't know that people are going to, want to have this amazing fable that is Beast of the Southern Wild. And then that film doesn't pass censorship in China. Don't get me started. So it's fascinating to see how our business is. And God, I don't go to the casino. I just work every day, and I'm really challenged. So,
Allison, I want to let you get in there.
I want to circle back. You said that Booksmart didn't manage to find a spot. And I'd actually like to take a moment to distinguish between finding a spot and performing to expectations. And to your point about Lady Bird versus Booksmart, they opened with completely different distribution strategies. Lady Bird opened in 2 cities and rolled out slowly with tremendous critical support. Booksmart opened very, very wide.
Very aggressive.
The expectations for how those films would perform reflected those distribution strategies. So I think we need to be careful in saying films are failing or films aren't finding an audience, when what we're really saying is there are very competitive bidding wars occurring at Sundance. There are different distribution release strategies being used, and sometimes films don't perform to the expectations embedded in those strategies.
But even given the optics of the performance of Long Shot and Late Night and Booksmart, even here at TIFF, people are saying, is it worth investing? Is it worth picking up the next hot title, given the way the audience is changing, given the reluctance to go out and support these smaller titles?
And the question of worth it is very tricky. And in some ways, I think Matthew, given the scope of his work, can talk about certain kinds of worth in with a different vocabulary than me. 70% of the organizations I work with are nonprofits. So I'm very invested in the cultural importance of cinema, why it is important to create spaces for people to work together, to watch films together, and also how we can take a moment of change and disruption and have it motivate us to be more bold and risk-taking. So a fear I have as I listen to this conversation unfold is that in hearing that this is a moment of market change, people will want to adhere to or invest in or exhibit films that are similar to success that has occurred in the past, instead of thinking about whose stories they have not heard before, which filmmakers have not previously been supported, and how they can share the space of their cinemas with them. And I think it's really meaningful to think about also so over the past decade, lots of art houses have added a second screen. We've seen a lot of physical growth of their spaces. Those second and third screens, becoming a twin, becoming a threeplex, allows theaters to innovate what they exhibit, to go beyond 4 times a day on a screen to thinking about maybe there's a film like the documentary Whose Streets about Black Lives Matter in Ferguson, that maybe you don't screen 4 times a day for 3 weeks.
So giving you the flexibility to target specific audiences or communities while still keeping the rest of your calendar running.
A meaningful, thoughtful, innovative documentary that for the people who do come see it, it is the film that connects them to your theater in a meaningful way and makes them distinguish your theater and the theatrical experience from other theaters, from the experience they could have at home.
Matthew, I'm an optimist, I'm a romantic. I can't possibly believe that I'm going to lose that theatrical experience. But do you think there's that it's just, I'm sorry, people are laughing, I'm sorry. I hope, I wish, I pray, but is it going to settle down to a lower level? Do you think it may not disappear, but it's going to stabilize at a previously unseen depth?
Yeah, I think it has to, because again, we know that this is a valuable channel. We know that audiences do like it, and there are enough breakout successes. I think one of the things that's going to be a really big opportunity that's perhaps underappreciated in the short term is the challenges that the majors are having with their non-top 1 or 2 franchises are just as severe as the ones that some of the independents are facing, which we know about the mid-budget films, but we also take a look at the franchises that underperformed this year. Even the biggest, like the Fast and Furious Presents Hobbs and Shaw, is the lowest performing in 11 years and 6 films in the franchise, and that was actually before they turned it into a blockbuster franchise of action heroes and saving the world. And so the consequence of that is, when you look at those slates of 20 films and 15 films, many of those films, even the big IP, even the big studios, are going to start being shifted to their platforms. So if you're Warner Media, you might go from having 15 films to having 10 films in the box office, but 25 total with the delta going to your platform. And the answer is, when we talk about big films or too many films and the marketing channel getting oversaturated, we're actually going to see the majors start to pull back. And that's going to create breathing room for everyone.
But then where does the new infusion of originality come? Like even at the studio level. Like if you look at the top 20 films from the past few years, everything already existed as an IP in some other form. It's either sequels or franchises or reboots. They're just not making new stories anymore. And when Disney runs out of recycling our favorite cartoons from 2 decades ago, what are they going to do?
I'm not worried.
No?
No, because Disney reinvents themselves. It's like a 7-year cycle. You leave it for the next generation. No, they have it all planned out. I think we're okay. Disney we're fine. They're gonna be fine. But
don't worry about Disney, anyone.
Yeah.
Disney is fine. Thank God.
They killed Bambi's mother. But actually, you know what? I think what's happening is, I don't know, but superheroes, like I'm 55 years old. It's a secret, so let's keep it this. I'm done with this. Like, hello, can we have something else? I feel like this is like this, we have a smorgasbord of the same thing. It's just recycled. Right. What's happening to that generation that are sick of the Marvel comics? How many can you consume and not, get sick?
Well, I think the interesting question to your answer of what comes next is, if you take a look at what's happened today, we've had some amazing success stories with taking even the superhero franchises and doing a Black Panther or a Wonder Woman. We're also doing a lot more as an industry to improve representation. What hasn't really been fixed yet is the supply chain of new IP, new storytellers, and just training for those. And I'm not saying Hollywood has a good solution for those. They don't. Everyone's working on it. But I think the simple answer to your question and your question of what's next is the studios are starting to, and it's going to take a long time, but to try and build that pipeline internationally. The next Harry Potter, the next Marvel Comics, the next Star Wars is not coming from the West. In fact, we've spent 25 years now trying to adapt Robin Hood twice, King Arthur, Dracula 3 times, Hercules, Clash of the Titans, all of this British literature and the Western adaptations over and over and over. And the good news is Marvel is going to succeed. They might falter a little bit and we might get a little bit more tired of those. But everything else that is being tried that is Western and Eurocentric, white creators, white male creators, the good news is those have actually been struggling perpetually, and that is starting to force change. There's time, because they're not staffed for the right people. They don't even know who to go to. But there are Indian and Jakartan Stan Lees there, and we'll start to get those.
How important do you think is the marketplace in China? I mean, you hear these remarkable statistics of building something like 18 screens a day, and yet, of course, you only get a percentage of that box office if it's a Western-made film. But do you see that being an increased focus?
No one is really getting bailed out of an underperforming franchise from doing well in China. It's primarily gravy. It's an opportunity. But right now, because of your point, you're collecting 25 cents on the dollar compared to 62 cents on the dollar here and 40 cents abroad.
And if they allow your film to play, because they still restrict.
Right, and if they then allow it to play and give you a slot that's competitive, that's well-timed, if they actually direct ticket holders to buy competing domestic production to stymie you on the stubs, it's not a savior yet. And in fact, the Chinese audiences have been increasingly rejecting American content or cooling on it. And to point about developing international IP, there's a brand new film that came out, I can't remember the title, but it's basically a Chinese Pixar attempt, and it has blown away Avengers Endgame in that marketplace. And that shows you the potential that we will start to see everywhere. And to the extent that those economics improve or the opportunity becomes irrefutable, that's going to force the Disneys and everyone else to say, actually, you know what? Our franchises are not Western-centric. They're not even English-centric.
Now, Anik, one thing that the other elephant in the room is streaming, and the idea that, well, I'll just focus on Netflix. I'll just sell to Amazon. You have some opinions on that.
I have some experience on that because, you know, it's very fascinating. I deal with a slew of producers from worldwide, from Spain and Middle East and whatsoever. And often it's like, oh, well, if you don't sell it, just sell it to Netflix. And okay, sure, not a problem. It's a phone call away. No, it isn't. You know what? It's interesting because Netflix are, they're the prime of being able to, but they don't because everyone's going to them. They have the slew of everything that's offered to them. They will not buy every single film. And I think it's often that you have that reflex of saying, yeah, just, turn around and what about Netflix? And you know what? No, they don't buy that much because they're creating content. They're basically trying to see how they're challenged themselves. There's Warner, there's Disney, everyone's creating their own platform, and they need to have that recognition of that stamp of Netflix. And they're really, I think they're trying to reinvent themselves. But I don't see that this is the answer of saying, at least, I sell business to business. I sell to distributors. I would sell to Netflix. But the other thing is when you do sell to Netflix, if you have a first-time director and you take his film and you put it on Netflix and then you're saying, well, it'd be great if they'd be able to do some festivals and whatsoever. And I was like, yeah, if it goes to Cannes, fine. If it goes to Berlin, fine. But the rest of them, we don't need them. Well, that's unfortunate for that first-time director because that first-time director will not be able to go and have his film presented and be in front of audience and get to have people know him and actually get that communion with the audience. And this is essential for those first-time directors, and it's really important to make them grow. So there's a responsibility. When you are, let's say Netflix does buy, it comes with a price. It does come from that ticket of, that first director may be forgotten because it'll be in the whole Netflix scheme where, my God, where do you find it? Oh, okay.
Well, and we've seen directors now promoting their own films that have gotten picked up by Netflix, and Netflix didn't decide to promote it or just a soft launch, the softest launch ever, and so they're out there on social media saying, oh, hi, my film's out there now, please click on it, because they're just trying to get that attention. Alison, you mentioned the film festivals. I want to get a sense from you. I mean, how much does that awareness help the theaters you work with? What's happening here? What's happening in Venice? The excitement around these titles?
I think positive critical response absolutely helps a film. I think for art house and independent filmgoers certainly have their stars, and they also have filmmakers that they're passionate about. I think looking at Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and Us this year and how they performed demonstrates that people care about filmmakers. Those are both kind of crossover titles that played in plexes, played at art houses, but critical response, conversations around quality absolutely impacts art house theater going. One thing I think about a lot, hearing what you have to say, thinking about my own experience at a festival is what we lose when films move over to streaming. Many of the people in this room, many people who attend Sundance, who attend TIFF, will continue to have access to the theatrical experience. We get to go to film festivals. It's amazing. I love it. I love to go to the movies. I love to watch them in theaters. I'm sure this comes as a tremendous surprise to everyone. Every time I'm at a film festival, I feel like a little kid and think it's the coolest thing ever. It's so exciting. Not everyone has that opportunity. So as we move more and more content over to streaming, what experiences are being lost for everyone who does not have the opportunity to attend a film festival? I saw American Factory at Full Frame Documentary Festival in Durham, North Carolina. It was an audience that combined documentary fans with people from North Carolina, people who had been involved in the labor movement,
yeah, I'm sure they could relate,
and festival attendees. That was an incredible experience, led to a meaningful conversation. I watched Knock Down the House in my living room by myself. That is a film that when I watched people walking out of the screening and at Sundance, they were in tears. I wish I could have been at one of the few community impact screenings that were hosted around the country. In watching that film alone, I missed out on what was a meaningful and substantive experience that I want people everywhere to be able to have the opportunity to have, and not just people that get to come to Sundance or get to come to TIFF.
In the age of streaming and Fortnite, and as Matthew said, where we can all be our own individual programmers, how do you help people rediscover the pleasures of that communal experience?
will you make the communal experience an excellent one? So you do not want going to the cinema to feel like a hassle. Excellent projection, knowledgeable programming staff.
More of a premium experience?
Would you elaborate upon what you mean by premium?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen a trend in Canada, for example, with the VIP cinemas where they bring food to you, where you're paying a little extra for extra service, and it's more of a, you know, kind of cushier way of watching a film at a higher price.
Not necessarily. I think not every film is equally suited for the dine-in experience.
Right.
I think with the dine-in options expanding, we all have our own intuition about what movies we are comfortable eating during and which films maybe not.
True.
I do not think I go to all kinds of cinemas all the time. Some screenings might feel like a great fit for dine-in, but I do not think the future of theatrical is that every screening becomes exactly the same. I think you want high-quality projection, and you want a knowledgeable staff that is rooted in the community where the theater is based. So, and works with other organizations where the theater is based, so that you're not just bringing amazing films from around the world, but you are able to initiate a dialogue about what those films around the world mean to you in Milwaukee, or in Minneapolis, or in Boston, or in Chicago, or in Austin, Texas. And I think that that is really, really crucial. Really thinking about and sometimes asking yourself hard questions about who feels welcomed in your cinema, how your theater establishes and sustains relationships, about who is on your programming staff, about who is on your staff in general.
So
and
inclusion, reaching out to new communities that may not be at the table.
The cultivation of meaningful partnerships and stakeholders in your organization who you are prepared to listen to and create space for and program for will make people not just like your cinema or go there because you've made it convenient, but have a long-standing relationship with your cinema.
It can be tough for organizations to kind of realize the blind spots they have, but Anik, I see you wanted to get in.
If I can get my mic happening. God, it's falling. I would say one thing, you know, for me, what you're saying is music to my ears. If everyone could be like you, I would be so happy because that would make my life easier. I think there's a lack of responsibility from theater owners because the business was booming, you know, it was like, you know, ringing in and take it out. And I think now we're challenged because there's other things to do in life. But you need to reinvent yourself at the cinema level. There's Mario Fortin in the room here who's, you know, he's done the Cinéma Beau Bien and he's grown. And yesterday alone he was saying, it's going too well. My God, if every theater owner could tell me it's going too well, I think this room would be empty and we wouldn't even have a topic. But I think it's taking the responsibility and respecting who your audience is. And I think we've been in this McDonald's of, you know, churning out and let's sell the popcorn. We don't care what's on the screens. It's just whatever popcorn it sells. And there is a business for that. But there's also a business like yours, Alison. And I think we're at a time where we need to regroup and rethink how we're doing this business because there is the love of it and there is the art of it. And I think there is, you know, we need to rethink that at your level, but also at everyone's level of which films are we putting there, you know. And I'm going to come back to, you know, when a film gets selected in TIFF, we have some films that are really great that we love. Whatever films we take on, it's because of pure love. And here we are in TIFF, and we are struggling to get these films reviewed by press because they're busy with the bigger films. And we have really amazing films, but you know what? God forbid Screen would have time, and God forbid Variety would put on a journalist on it. Because you know what? It's not as sexy. And that's really, it really disappoints me, but that's life, you know? If I can't deal with it, I'll get out of the business. But the point is it is a struggle at every level, and we all need to be screaming out our love for cinema, the love of art house, and I think Disney can do a great job of screaming for their stuff, but we need to have people that are advocates of this business. And we're all responsible. It's like recycling. We need to, to take stand on saying we need quality content. We need to bring that content and talk about it. We need to actually say, I'm going to the cinema. There's something I need to learn. But then we're getting filmmakers. And for instance, Xavier Dolan, for his latest film, Mathias et Maxime, is going in 15 cinemas across Quebec to actually present his film. That's what needs to be done now, because he's connecting with his audience and he's able to talk to them and people feel involved, and then that magic comes together. That's where we're at. We're at that level now because it's challenged.
I'm going to open it up to questions in a moment, so start thinking of what you want to ask. We're going to have a couple people in the room with microphones. They can come to you once we see your hand. I'll just finish up. Matthew, price. If we lower the price, there's been some kind of flirting with these subscription models. Do you think lowering that barrier to entry, do you think that could help?
No, I think that when you sum it together, the key reasons why people are not going to the theaters is because of what product is available at home, and the fact that, frankly, getting in your car, going to the movie theater, finding parking, getting there early, waiting for the uncomfortable seats beside you to fill up, and hoping that the patron beside you
gets off their phone.
Among other worse things.
Yeah.
The good news is, if you take a look at what Jeffrey Katzenberg and Steven Spielberg were talking about a few years ago, they said that the Marvel movies should be $25 and an indie film like Lincoln should be $7. I actually think the answer to both is the former, which is the good news about anyone who reduces their consumption is if you peel away from 5 films to 3 films, the 2 films that you were least attached to, by definition, your willingness to pay and your attachment to the few films you go to goes up. The good news is, if you start to believe that one of the key drivers is the culturally resonant product, the RBG, that has social value, that has educational value, that has quality behind it, that drives conversation, that price needs to go higher. And it's terrifying all the theater operators for 2 reasons, one of which is they're already scared about declining consumption. Yeah. They don't want to exacerbate that. And the reality is the industry made a big mistake decades ago when the studios and the distributors didn't participate in concessions and confections. And they know that if they crank up the price of a ticket from $10 to $20, more than half of that is going to come from the revenue they don't share, and that's a hot dog or a bag of popcorn. And the problem with that is that starts to starve out all of the artists that are behind it. And so I'm optimistic that the pricing will start to go up. Even if it doesn't go up as much as it should, that's going to be good for the community, but it has to go higher.
I mean, it is a way of assigning value. You're saying this is an important thing and it is worth 20 of your dollars.
And to point, when you went to the theater 30 or 50 times a year, back in the days in which you didn't actually know a showtime or what was playing, you went, you showed up, you looked at the billet, and you decided a film. By definition, that was more substitutable. And now that it's not,
people are conditioned to paying hundreds for like actually seeing a stage performance. So we don't look to, cheap Tuesdays when you go to Broadway. And if we're now only going to the movies 2 or 3 or 4 times a year, I mean, perhaps that needs to evolve. Do we have questions? I can continue. Trust me, I can. But if you have questions for our esteemed panel, if you want to raise your hands, and we will get a microphone to you. Gentleman in the front, if the microphone is approaching. Here she comes. So you could just introduce yourself and let us know who you would like to ask.
Hey.
Hi.
My name is Jan, and this is a general question for the panel. But what are your thoughts on audience participation in the creation of content and how that will affect cinemas?
Can you define audience participation?
Sure. The creation of content, whether that's, let's say, feature film content, etc., with the audience actually participating in creatively, whether that's in the pre-production process or the production process, potentially even as cast.
Oh, okay. Anyone want to take, that's sort of interactive. Matthew, do you want to jump into that one?
Yeah, I mean, so we tried something at Amazon, which was to do public pilot testing for our TV shows, and there was a big challenge with the fact of there is a disconnect between how quickly you learn whether something works, which is your opening weekend or your premiere, and how deep in the investment process you have to be to get there, right? You've filmed an entire television series, you've done post-production, localization, subtitling, and that's when you get it. And I think everyone's trying to figure out how do you build the audience in earlier. There's a real burden to that because it slows down production. Trying to interpret what people say they like and what they do like is different. I call it Nickelback's law. Nickelback was the best-selling band of the 2000s, the best-selling band, and yet people not only don't claim to like them, but they go out of their way to tell you they hate them.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the answer is, yeah, the more you build people in, the better. That builds your audience and so forth. One of Marvel's advantages, actually, is not just the IP, it's that they've tried to tell different versions of Tony Stark's story for 60 years. They know which worked because audiences said, this sucks, I'm not buying the comic. And they know what works, and producer Kevin Feige gets to curate through them. Everyone's trying to find what that looks like. I don't think anyone has a good thesis on how that's working yet, but we'll see.
And with filmmakers, I mean, I think part of what audience respond to is that unique vision. It's like Jordan Peele had something to say with Get Out, and he didn't do that with a poll. He didn't do that by consensus. It was like something that was bursting inside him that finally was a culmination of his career, right? That he put it out there and then it resonated. And so, yeah, I wonder about that. I see more hands. Thank you for your questions. So let's go in the back row right there. Yes.
Hi. My name is Serge from Hawaii. I'm wondering what are your thoughts on upcoming technologies that will allow new type of experience, like immersive life experiences? Do you think that will have a further impact on the business? We've been waiting for 15 years for VR to really kick in, but do you think now that technology is really picking up, that it will have a positive or negative impact and will change the industry?
3D is certainly declining, so what do you say to that?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is the last 15 years, we're actually in the third decade of digital video, and yet the primary solution to digital video is either to skip an analog channel like the theater or to increase the budget, right? Television today is at a higher production level on average than we've ever seen before. What people haven't done is say, how would you tell these stories if they had been around when TV was invented, when video was invented? And right now, everyone's starting to do that. And I'll give you an example of a company that I've worked on, and this shows the example. It's not hyper-scalable, but it shows you what filmmakers are starting to play around with, which is the idea that your iPad knows where you're looking. They know what the lighting in the room is like. They know where you've been that day. They know the angle of your phone. And VR is one thing, but some things that a bunch of horror and thriller movie creators are doing is saying, rather than say at minute 33 and 19 seconds, we're going to try and scare you with the clown from It, but we're going to band that and wait for your eyes to trail away from the screen and then try to terrify you.
So it's a tailored experience dependent on your...
I would put it more as still, yes, to what you want. And the key here is, one of the things that people struggle with VR is the idea that you don't have editorial control. You don't choose the shot and the cinematography and all of those things that are important to storytelling. There's an opportunity somewhat in between there, which is just, let's figure out when we scare you rather than try to guess. And other elements, which is just imagine when you're watching another thriller, and again, horror, because it's so evocative, is easy, but where the phone call that happens in the show is actually made to your cell phone. And you're...
Wow.
That's just mean.
Or your iPad, or your iPad forces you to turn the lights off in your house. And where the phone call that comes to your phone knows, because you did Google Maps, where you went that day. The question, I think about it is, if you think of it from the storyteller perspective, you now have availability of new different ways of enriching the immersion, the suspension of disbelief, and new tools and toolkits you had. You used to have audio and video, now you have a lot more. And as storytellers, especially those that are used to doing Instagram stories or YouTube video, those new creators at low cost start to say, I can now do something no one else can, and guess what? All of the old roster of directors, they're just trying to move it from this screen to this screen, and I want to do something new. That's going to lift the entire opportunity and market.
But that's still, it seems like a one-to-one experience. That's not a communal
It'll get to communal.
Right. Question over there, please.
Hi, I'm a film reviewer. I've been a movie critic for 25 years, and I've seen along those 25 years our influence decline greatly. And I was wondering, especially I want to ask Alison, if movie critics, movie reviewers are still important to bring people into your theaters.
Yes, absolutely. I think that, of course, engagement with criticism has shifted in some ways. Some that I think have been, there's a lot of aggregation of reviews. I think people look at Rotten Tomatoes. And it pains me in some ways to say that to a writer because I read criticism in full and I think that's important. But I do think the kind of overall critical perception of a film's quality for art house cinema is impactful. If you go on an online ticket retailer, there is, it links directly to a film's Rotten Tomatoes. I think that that is clearly impactful. I also think that public radio has a pretty big impact in the art house sector. So if filmmakers are interviewed on public radio, if there is ad placement, if the film is received positively there, I think that continues to drive attendance.
Yes? We'll just wait for the mic to get over to you. Here we go. Next.
My name is Sasha. I'm a filmmaker based in Toronto here. I have a question about, so when I was in the States last year, AMC has rolled out this really amazing program called AMC Stubbs, which for $25 a month, you can see 3 films a week. You pick the tickets, it could be the new release and film that's been out for weeks, whatever. So essentially 12 films a month, and you have up until the screening starts to be able to cancel it. Now, I, as a filmmaker and film goer, was following the trend of movie going, where I was going less and less every year. But when I was a part of that program, I found that it reduced a lot of the thought that I had with going because I'd already paid for the film, essentially. It was just, and it made me more curious or give movies I might not typically give a chance. But that's, to me, it seems too good to be true, a model like that. And I'm curious if you think that's a sustainable thing or if that's a thing that will, so if it's sustainable is my main question.
Yeah, so we have a perfect case study as to whether or not it's consequential, which is separate from sustainable, which is MoviePass came out, they went as low as $7 per month and you could go 31 times in a month. And that's not sustainable. They were losing $4 to $8 per ticket. And yet the total impact, even among moviegoers, was negligible. And so if you get the price point to $25 and you even assume it's sustainable, if it's 4 times the price, the effect's going to be even more moderated. The more important thing is ticket prices have gone up 15% in 15 years. It seems like they've gone higher, but you get more because it's VIP, the seats are better. You have to believe that the reason people aren't going to films and because of indie films is because they're $10 on average. And would they be going 20% more if they were $8 or $6 or $5? I don't think that's the case there. I think it's actually more if they want to go, the price to pay is higher.
But you know what? I don't totally, maybe you have the numbers to talk, but I find that we've lost the essence of creating a habit. We've lost the idea of, I'm going to the cinema. This is like, okay, let's go to see a film. I think we've lost that with the impact of having, staying home and having series and whatsoever. And I think, Europe does a lot of those passes, and they have a fidelity of their clientele that, they are born and they speak about cinema. They go to dinners and they talk about the latest film. It is part of their DNA. How come in North America it's like, oh yeah, say which series, which TV, series are you watching? Right. There's no, it's like almost like in Europe there is this, I've seen this film and it's, making me think of this other film and whatever. I've actually had a Q&A in Europe where actually they were citing whatever author. It's really interesting how it is culturally very different as a habit. Right. But point of view, what I'm trying to say here is I do feel that this is an idea of, you are used to going to the cinema. It's like saying, I'm not calling someone forever. You've lost the habit of it. And I think we need to recreate that habit of going to the cinema. And I think it's really important to start doing that again.
One more quick question, and then we're going to have to call it a day. Over there, please.
Hi, I'm a filmmaker from India. Somebody mentioned that the Chinese market is not a savior yet. It has been for various Indian movies. They have recovered multiple times their recovery in India, in China. In some cases, almost 20 times than what they've collected in India. You also talked about there being a lack of new IP and new storytellers, and how existing blockbusters are Western-centric or English-centric. So the simple question is, there is a lot of stories in Eastern cultures. There is a greater depth of mythology, and there's a greater source to draw cinema from. What seems to be the barrier for movies that are produced in the East to get a legitimate claim to the market in North America and become a truly universal franchise?
There are a bunch of problems, but one of which I think is a fundamental mental frame where when people say IP, what they mean is Western Eurocentric IP. And I think that that's latent, and I don't think many people confront it. And as a result, I think what happens is you don't say IP, you say that's Latinx IP, that's Indian IP, that's diverse IP. And as a result, there's a reluctance to try and develop an audience and an ecosystem around it in a way that even if you say Robin Hood's not really that popular, but it's easier to say. You're like, that's IP, my father read it, I have my son read it. And I think so part of that is as diversity and representation changes, that's going to get better, but people have to find ways to get out of that mental block of saying, that's not IP, that's Eastern mythology. Right. That's a problem.
Often right now, the people who are saying yes are more familiar with Robin Hood than the next story. So something to think about. Thank you so much. We are out of time. Please welcome Anik, Matthew, Allison. And thank you for joining us. Have a great festival. All right. I don't know how we exit. Here we go.
Esteemed, thank you so much to our esteemed speakers. If you guys can please clear out the room, we have to set up for the next session, but we want you to come back for 3 o'clock for Engage at TIFF. Thank you so much.